welcome back everyone. IT Horror Stories with Jack Smith. I am Jack Smith, and this time Andrew is back. Hey Andrew.
Hi Jack.
Hey. You okay, sir?
Yes, certainly. How are you?
Can't complain, to be honest. You asked me if you could tell one of your stories about DDoSing, etc.
Yes.
I'll give you the microphone and I will ask the stupid questions this time. You go ahead.
Ha, nice. I thought I'd share this story because it was major at the time, and it certainly was a highlight of my career and made an influence on my further decisions. So that was over 10 years ago, by the time that Anonymous was going through the globe and putting out DDoS attacks everywhere. I was at that point in time supporting a data center infrastructure which had more than one customer, and it had a lot of different things like hosting websites, hosting databases, things like that. It was a Tuesday, I'm rather sure of that.
Oh, if you remember the day of the week, this is serious.
Yes, a typical Tuesday. And I remember that I sat at my desk and my boss asked me to go pick up some papers from the printer or something, I think. Very simple task. So I left my cubicle, I went through a door, paper thin wall, by the way, got to the printer, picked up some stuff. Must have been a few minutes, got back, and I opened the door and it was like a movie scene. People were running around and there were actually papers floating in the air that someone threw up. And everyone was frantically hitting on their keyboard and typing commands, and my fellow engineers were all investigating, and there was a group of 3 or 4 people, my boss and a few engineers, discussing something loudly, and I thought, okay, what happened in a few minutes? And then I look at the main dashboard screen, the one which we proudly hung up in the middle of the room to a wall, which displayed the statistics of bandwidth usage in the data center.
And I can guess that the everything is fine display was not.
No, I noticed then that the internet lines, multiple of them, were all flatlining at their 100%. So that immediately made me realize something is going on, followed by attack. And I joined in immediately. I went to my desk and started logging into systems, mainly the routers towards the internet, of course, checking, okay, what is going on? Firewall, I was looking with colleagues. And, well, it was a DDoS attack, but we were completely unprepared. We did not have any anti-DDoS measures, and it was just overwhelming us. My colleagues and my boss were reasoning at that point how the TCP protocol behaves and how they should do to counter it, and I quickly pointed out it's UDP, it's flooding. I was also able to quickly find, with a colleague, the destination IP address. I happened to find the destination IP address because the other ones were looking at the source IP address. That was the first command they given. So I was the
Wow.
Yeah, we were unprepared. I was the accidental hero of that minute.
Yeah, you're really sounding like the one-eyed person in the land of the blind right now.
Nah, I don't want to make it sound like that. I guess I was lucky because I didn't receive the initial flood because I was at the printer. I didn't receive the initial orders to go and check the source IP addresses. And that's why I zoomed in on the destination IP address. So it was more of a lucky shot. If another guy was at the printer, probably he would have been that guy.
Okay.
But okay, so then we quickly found that it was going towards one IP address, one server. And then my boss issued a command. Well, there's nothing we can do. Shut down access to the server. Let them win. And that actually was a right call. We disabled access to that server completely, removed it from the network, and the attack stopped. So then we got an aftermath. We were looking a bit like, okay, at each other, like having just survived an earthquake. What happened here?
Can I jump in for a second here? Because you said it's one specific server or one specific IP. So this was targeting one specific customer and one specific of their systems.
That's part of the story, actually. We then, by then we got managers informing what happened because everyone was without internet or slow or non-working. So we quickly could state, okay, there has been an attack. We don't know more than that. I think 10 minutes later, half an hour later, we knew more because someone proudly emailed us, we are anonymous, and the mess that you are seeing was caused by us. I do not know what was exactly in the mail. I didn't see it. I do know that we quickly found out that they were targeting a website which was of religious nature.
Okay.
And it turned out that one of our customers had sub-hosted websites. So they were hosting websites, but they sold some services as well further up in the chain.
Okay.
One of them was a religious organization. And that religious organization happened to be a target.
Okay. So they took the website, they did a reverse, did the DNS lookup, and that was the IP address, and that was the one that they hit.
Yeah, that's basically it. It
Okay.
was clearly a distributed attack. The number of IP addresses or source were nearly uncountable. They were all using the same port and protocol. So it was clearly orchestrated, and we were there. Now, what happened over the coming hours and days? One, I was tasked with enabling the server again via a separate firewall. So we got a spare one from stock, and we were like, okay, the firewall seemed to have gotten overwhelmed as well as the internet line. We can fix the firewall thing.
Yep.
Once I booted up the firewall and assigned IP addresses to it, I noticed that it got probed every 2 seconds from somewhere around the world to see if the server was alive. So I informed my boss, this is likely not a good idea. There is an incoming probe from a random IP address every 2 seconds, so
They're still watching.
us.
Yeah.
This is not a good idea. And by the time a few hours, we're a day later then, I think. And then that was the morning. And then by the afternoon, the decision still wasn't been made. And then we heard that the religious instance had just left us by then. Which was funny because we did a DNS lookup then,
Yep.
out of curiosity, where are they going? And they went to one of the major cloud providers,
Yep.
who 2 days later, on the instance, the data center in the world where the main instance of the religious organization was hosted,
Yeah.
had downtime due to a DDoS attack. They just followed.
I remember that news item.
Yeah, that was a news item at
Yes,
the time.
indeed.
So we as an IT team were a bit like, okay, glad to get rid of that because that would obviously been a lot more trouble. But then it wasn't done yet because what we had clearly demonstrated to the outside world was that we were sitting birds. We were unprepared.
Yeah.
And that was a bad thing. So
So to frame it, it's a decade ago.
more than at
More
least.
than indeed. I can imagine that DDoSing was maybe not new, but not that super common.
It wasn't super common.
Would it have been able to be prepared back then?
Well, I'll get into that. It's a money question.
It isn't it always?
Yeah. First thing we did, by the way, to give some technical background. So we went to our providers of the internet lines. We told them, like, is there anything you can do? Now, back in the day, they didn't have DDoS services yet, the providers themselves.
Yep.
Is there anything you can see? And, well, we had a decent internet connection at the time, multiple gigabits,
Yep.
which maybe 10 gigs, I don't know anymore, which was decent. And for all the customers, it definitely gave a lot of bandwidth. It's not like we had any problem with bandwidth throughout the day. But the providers came back to us and said, yeah, well, our backbone is 300, 400, 500 gigabit. And we indeed see a 1% blimp, but that's about it. This is unfortunately somewhat baseline traffic for us.
So they didn't care.
They didn't care. And we also found out later that it's likely that they knew our total bandwidth, anonymous. Otherwise, they would have thrown more at it.
Yeah, that they did a guesstimate or they measured.
Yeah, they probably sent more than our pipes could take, but it wasn't a massive overstatement. So they probably had a ballpark figure of what we were capable of.
Yeah.
The next thing that happened is that we started getting attacked on regularly
Okay.
because we had been proven to be a weak target.
And then they would come for other things in your hosting
Yeah.
environment after.
Generally find an open server, sometimes plainly the firewalls themselves, just front-end facing IP addresses, not caring what they hit.
Blah. Go.
And there would form a pattern. And that's an interesting one because the pattern started to be that there would be an increase the moment there wasn't any school.
Okay.
So where it initially was throughout the day, my personal theory is that some younger people, some children, may have been involved with Anonymous, directly or indirectly, and they kept going on. And we knew eventually, especially school vacations, it would increase. After school, it would increase a bit, the probability of an attack. And it was getting annoying because there is no advance warning of a DDoS attack.
No, it just comes.
It just comes. I had to explain this to countless managers throughout the years, but don't we get a warning and things like that? I said, you're comparing it to standing on a prairie, building a tower and watching in the distance on the horizons if you see the cattle arrive. But you will know when the cattle is there when they mow down your tower. You don't get an advance warning. It's all or nothing.
We choose not to have any subscription model nor sponsoring in order to keep our stories accessible for each and everyone. To support us, please check our merchandise at shop.ithorrorstories.eu or buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/ithorrorstories.
I want to come back on the timing because you said school vacation. So then was it only weekends or could you pinpoint it? Okay, they're in this time zone and they are in this region because it overlaps with, say, any Easter holiday or spring holiday.
It happened to be near the large vacation.
Yeah, so the summer vacation.
And it coincided a bit like that. I'm not able to say after this time if there were more patterns. I think not. But it did coincide a bit with things here.
Okay, so it felt local.
Yeah, it felt local initiated at least. Because the IP addresses were clearly from all over the world.
But the timing was local.
But the time seemed local.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. Now, the attacks gradually increased. Not in intensity, but in number. And at a certain moment, we were facing a 2 days a week outage, which was clearly unbearable.
Yes.
Now, by then, there were DDoS protection solutions on the market. We were immediately watching for it the day after the attack already. But it initially got shut down by the management because at the time, they were very expensive.
Yes.
Thinking the price of a house, an entire house.
You would be a few hundred K.
A few hundred K per internet line.
Of which you had multiple.
Yeah, so that would be a massive figure.
So in total, a few million is a safe?
No, it would be less, but...
About $1 million.
About $1 million.
Okay.
Could have been a ballpark figure here, depending on the vendor.
Okay.
Of course, you're a bit caught out in the open, so you don't really have time to thoroughly check the vendors. We were doing that as well. With the time that was in a way given to us by management because they didn't want to implement it yet. This is no negativity about that management because this is an unexpected investment here that pops up that isn't small in any means. But eventually facing the massive downtime, we had no choice. I've heard that they were emotionally shaken while they signed the bill
the
to get
PO,
them installed.
Yeah.
But that was interesting. Because what we then saw was we eventually installed the devices. They are, by the way, really neat from a technical point of view.
Yeah, I want to come to that because I want to know how they work on a high level-ish. Yeah.
Go about the rest first. So we installed them. We faced 2 days after installation, maybe 3. We faced an attack. We saw it on the devices and they swallowed it whole.
Okay.
And then the attack stopped because... the outside world knew, fun's over.
As the Borg, they have adapted.
Yeah, there was no fun anymore. Now, we had one funny situation with it still, and one, for me personally, frightening situation with it.
Okay.
The funny one was that about a few months later, they suddenly went crazy in their logging and alerting that we were under full attack.
Okay.
And that they were also passing through the traffic, I believe.
Okay, so, and then with they mean like the internal networks that we're under attack, the new devices aren't working anymore.
Yeah. And so we immediately went to full alert, thinking, oh no, something is on it again and the devices can't follow. But what turned to be out the case, we were hosting a website which was related to a children's television channel. And apparently, unbeknownst to us, they had been making advertisements all month that on that very day, they would launch their new games website. And it was indeed, I think, 3:30, 4 o'clock, the time when the school ends. And the number of connections somewhat correlated with the number of kids in our country.
So every 10 to 14-year-old was hitting refresh.
Probably, yes. And they were all getting to those games, and it was an interactive game with a small movie, I think, and they were downloading, and it was a massive bandwidth, so a massive diversion from baseline, but at the same time, it was legit traffic, and I have to give it to these devices. They let it pass through. They recognize it as legit traffic.
Nice.
So that was nice, but it was a really weird situation. We were panicking for a moment, and then we realized, oh, wow, this is impressive. So that's the funny situation.
But?
The frightening one. Yeah. One of the attacks got through.
Okay.
I do not know the timeline. Is it before the games thing? Is it after? I don't remember. I do know at a certain moment an attack went through and the server in question went down due to a DDoS. But we quickly realized the server is down, not the internet line, not the firewall.
So it was a different component in the chain which gave up.
And then we were able to find this piece of packet capture from it or check it. And we found out that the attacker was using IP reassembly.
Okay.
So if your IP packet goes through a line where it can't support large or normal IP packages, but smaller one, it may break it up into smaller parts and reassemble it later on. Now, what it had done was, it was sending broken up IP packages, but the two pieces didn't match.
Okay.
There was tampering going on with the headers of the offsets and how big the packet should be versus how they actually were.
Yeah.
And once they hit our firewall, the firewalls attempted to reassemble that packet. Now, what would happen is they would reassemble the packet and they would click together two overlapping pieces.
Yeah.
In such a way that the destination IP changed. And then it could go to the internal server, which wasn't exposed yet. And I said, I'm worried now, because so far what we have seen is throw bandwidth at the problem, throw junk at the problem, and see if it goes down.
Yeah.
That is the entire premise of the DDoS that we have seen so far.
From your end, you just throw more resources against it until you're throwing more than they're throwing at you.
Basically, it's a game of who can dig the deepest well, I suppose, or something like that.
Who has the biggest squad gun?
Yeah, in fancy words.
Yes,
but this one was thought through. This was also done in a way that I suspect that the attacker knew which firewall platform we were running. Or a lucky guess, maybe. At the time, I was convinced that they probably knew which firewall platform we were running. But I learned later on that most firewall platforms have the same operating system under the hood. They are running a BSD version, by the way, most of them.
And then you look for IP stack behavior from those BSDs.
Probably.
And you make a good estimated guess.
Yeah, so after all these years, I'm a bit calmed down. I think probably they made a guess based on the fact that there is a commonality in most firewalls. And not specifically knowing the version. But it was a smart attack, and that was what worried me. It was like, not a kettle, but a sniper.
Yep.
Very precise, exactly one server. And I don't know what's on the server, by the way. It's probably someone who hated a competitor or something. I don't know. I know it wasn't really sensitive. It was at least not religious, as I said before. And yes, so that is one that worried me, but we never saw a second or third attack of that one. So
somebody was just putting a lot of effort to make a point.
Yes, and I have no idea who, what, where. I've never seen them again. So that will be forever my unknown nemesis.
Or it was perhaps a poke to see if they could get somewhere.
That might also have been.
And then it might not have been worth it. Well, as you said, this is all speculation, and finding out the actual thing might be complicated.
Indeed. So this is what we experienced back then at the front lines. We also took with the new device a DDoS training on how DDoSs behaved at the moment and how to deal with them. Which brings me to the technical part that you wanted to know, how do these things work?
Yes, please.
Yes. Let's start physically, because it's already an interesting one.
Good.
Because a DDoS protection device works differently from a default server or firewall or switch or whatever. It has two interfaces, two network interfaces on 1 or 10 or 100 gig probably. And one goes in the device.
Yep.
And then it goes through the motherboard and the CPU and everything for calculations. And then it goes out the other one.
Yep.
That's what you'd expect, except for one thing. If you unpower the device,
Yes.
a relay will kick in
Yep.
and connect the two directly together, the two network cards.
And then basically bypassing the device.
Yes, so a broken DDoS appliance actually still passes traffic without any power, because the relay will bind together automatically the two wires.
Yep.
If you pull the plug, you can actually hear the relay click.
It clicks so that if your device fails, you still have traffic, just it will not be protected anymore.
Yeah, that was a DDoS device at the time. I'll also give you some brief things about new technologies. What did it do? It did a sort of pattern recognition.
Okay.
It would use very different technologies stacked together. One of them is a TCP cookie, for example.
Okay.
Normally in a network connection, a reliable network connection TCP, you have a connection initiation, SYN. Your server replies,
Yep.
SYNAC. and
Synac,
then you get
Synac,
a-
yes.
The DDoS appliance would receive a SYN
Yep.
and then would send a SYNAC themselves.
Yes.
And if it would never receive a ACK from the client on the internet, it wouldn't pass on that burden to the backend server.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and it would keep track of it. And so if you have a basic SYN flooding attack, which is the most basic DDoS attack, in which you try to open as many connections as possible in a short time frame, it would actually capture them all and not burden your firewall, making new connections in the state table, not burden your servers. If it did get a SYNAC, it would then do the same from their point of view towards the server.
Yep.
And bind the two connections inside and outside together and allow it to be a normal connection.
Yes.
The big advantage of that one is that your website tends to stay reachable under full attack, because you're the one who does respond.
Yeah, indeed, because you want that ACK to come back so that you can continue to send on your request to the server.
Yeah, that's the most basic form. What else was there? It would keep count of connections that were deliberately slower. It would take into account connections that would multiple times per minute or per second try to renegotiate the security certificate for HTTPS connections.
It's sneaky, yes, okay.
Yeah, but we've seen that as well. Make one connection,
Oh, yeah. And then,
negotiate your encryption, which
then-
is a calculation,
yeah.
and then do it a dozen times again, indeed. You could actually get a server down on your knees, just that server, by making it perform a lot of encryption calculations.
Yes.
This podcast features Jack Smith and guests. We say thank you to our demo scene friends who helped making this podcast possible. Commander Homer for editing, Danko for music and audio advice, NetPoet for additional voiceovers.
It would do things like that. It would recognize voice traffic which had unusual size of UDP traffic. Like, this is not supposed to be happening. This seems more like a let's flood the line. It would do the same with DNS requests and things like that. Unusually large and useless requests would
So
be
some kind
alerted.
of packet analysis, like does this packet make sense?
Yeah. It also had a bit of a heuristics, and I was personally impressed by that, because we are speaking well before AI.
Yep.
But throw a new attack at it, and it would most of the time figure out this is not legit traffic compared to my baseline, and start filtering it at a certain point.
Okay. Yeah.
It would recognize patterns. So it was pretty nice for the time, definitely. Now, those were the physical devices. Of course, if you then flood the line and you place that device after your internet connection, you may filter it, but you're still flooding your internet connection. So ideally, you place them at the providers. And later on, that is why the providers started offering DDoS services where they
would put them on their huge uplinks.
Yeah.
And then filter out before it would get to you.
Yeah. Nowadays, all the cloud services have this as well. As a paid extra service because money. And additionally, there are techniques using BGP and GRE. What do you do there? You have just your data center, which is not protected by any form of DDoS physically. And you announce your IP ranges to the rest of the world. Here we are. The moment you get under attack, you divert your IP addresses to somewhere in the cloud. You start announcing it from there.
Yep.
So all traffic, including the DDoS traffic, will go to the cloud. The cloud then scrapes it completely, cleans it out as a service on demand, and will send it via a GRE tunnel towards your data center.
Okay, so how do you, because if you're under a DDoS, how do you get the signal we're under attack out to the cloud that they re-announce BGP that your IP has changed location?
No, you activate the service in the cloud.
Okay.
It requires that you have some kind of separate way to reach the cloud, not through
so you would go via a different route.
But it could be really small. So
yeah,
it could be as simple as send a message over 4G, for example, that the cloud has to become active. Because the moment the cloud becomes active, it will attract the traffic from the entire internet towards that cloud. And then it is scraped. Only the legit traffic is let through.
Yeah.
And the tunnel can go back through the same internet line that was attacked towards a data center. Now, that works pretty well. And I would say for over 90% of attacks, that will work just fine because they are attacks based on IP or DNS. But if someone specifically knows how to hit the internet router on-premise in your data center, that might pose a problem.
Quickly going back to then doing the previous relocation, how quickly does the internet know about this? Because it will need some time to update the routing tables that your IP address has physically moved.
There is typically a 3-minute renewal time for BGP. That is the protocol that runs the entire internet.
Yeah.
In fact, I've used that at home as a sort of a checkup. If you have no internet for exactly 3 minutes, I usually know some line upstream broke somewhere because that is the standard reconversions time for a backbone connection on the internet.
Yeah, that they had to then switch over and redo retransmit the BGP that, hey, this is now reachable via this routing.
Yeah, exactly. It's mostly done automatically, of course. Otherwise, it would not be scalable to the scale it is right now.
I don't know many guys that do manual BGP for fun.
No, that would be something. So that is a bit how I experienced my first DDoSes. I'm happy I got it.
And how to survive them.
And how to survive them. I later checked with engineers. I had a friend of mine who at the time was working for a major cloud provider. And I asked him, how would you have done that? Because we were completely unprepared. And I got back the question, did you have an anti-DDoS device at the moment on premise? No.
No, you didn't.
Okay. Did you have any mitigation discussed beforehand in place? No. Then I personally, even in my cloud environment, would disable the server that's being targeted. Yeah.
Once you know what they're going for, it's not going to be reachable anyway.
Yeah.
And then you make it unreachable and then see if it goes away or if they keep bombarding it.
He said the same, give them what they want. If you're unprepared, accept it. You're unprepared, give them what they want. It's a small price at that point.
And then basically your customer fixed the problem themselves because they went somewhere else with their...
Yeah, for us they did. For them they did not, apparently.
Well, you don't know what they promised them in kind of, we can take this. So that's pure speculation that
of course
has no use here. But you were the housing provider, and of course you were impacted, and as were your other customers.
I really think we all handled it as best as we could. It was the early days of DDoS. For me, we were at the time unprepared, but we were definitely prepared 1 year later down the road, so to speak. And these companies who were involved, all of them took their lessons to heart.
Yeah, it is a market that grew and matured really quickly.
Yeah, impressive.
You did have indeed a few months that was basically open season. And then, as you indicated, once that the upstream providers put those devices in place, that would have done a lot. And if you indeed do a basic SYN-ACK, then any traffic shaping can prevent that, because that's also one of the earliest traffic shaping devices we used. Like even I'm old. Last century is the previous century. Also used this SYN-ACK traffic to SYN-ACK delayed ACK sending.
Yeah, you're right, because I think I originally saw it on the PIX series of Cisco.
Yeah. So
and
that was
end of last century, as you said.
Yeah.
It's still in there in a lot of devices. A lot of reverse proxies have it. A lot of firewalls have it. And it's the most basic DDoS protection attack. Does it cover everything? No, not by a long shot, but it's a basic one.
It will cover the low-hanging fruit.
And I have to be fair in this. The lesson that I took from it is not the one where I recommend a DDoS protection to everyone. But it is still, at this point, an expensive technology. And if you do it via your provider for a fixed fee per month, or you buy the infrastructure, or you add it to your cloud, in most cases, it's quite expensive. And I usually am a bit hesitant to recommend it. So if I get a question from non-technical management, how do we do this? I present it as an insurance case. This is going to cost.
Yeah, this is a what-if question.
This is a what-if question. Are we prepared to take the risk? Are we prepared to not take the risk? And depending on the data and services in the data center, and depending on the data and services in the data center, it may just not be worth it. A data center that does not have any sensitive topic on board and does not have really a lot of exposed services and hasn't been targeted before, I tend to say, if this is a really expensive solution, you might want to take the risk and not invest in it.
Yeah.
But it is a risk. It's a low chance, high impact risk. I have to be honest for that one.
Fair enough.
But it's a low chance, so take your guess.
Well, that is then where senior management can earn their paycheck and sign off the risk sheet.
That is exactly it. I present fair risks. It's a lot of things in IT and network and server management and infra are like that. To invest in a second server in case the first one goes down, in a way, that's an insurance.
It is.
So that's the way to look at it.
So, insurance policies, the future of IT.
Yeah, it's just a fancy name,
Fancy, schmancy is how to... so basically, surviving anonymous equals car insurance.
In a way, it does.
This is summarizing it a lot. Okay. Well, Andrew, thanks for that. I learned something today that DDoS attack prevention is basically traffic shaping.
Yeah. The prevention itself is definitely traffic shaping.
Yeah.
The way to think about it is more insurance.
Yeah, then you're talking about how many nines and what's your availability, and you want high availability, and how much do you want to throw at it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an interesting way to conclude this. So thanks for the input. Andrew, thanks for joining.
Yes.
This was Jack Smith asking the questions today. You have been listening to IT Horror Stories with Jack Smith. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Deezer, wherever you find your podcast. New episode at least once a month. Merchandising at shop.ithorrorstories.eu or support us via Ko-fi. If you're not in the EU, you can change your shop region at the bottom of the page to go to the US page. Social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. All links are on our website, ithorrorstories.eu. Andrew, thank you for joining us, and you, thank you for listening. Until the next time. Bye-bye.
The content of this podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only and is meant to humorously explore various tech-related situations. Any resemblance to actual events or real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. We ridicule situations, never individuals or groups. Listener discretion is advised, and we encourage everyone to approach technology with a sense of humor and an open mind.